Jason Miller, 38, retired Delta Force commander, sits quietly in his backyard with his loyal dog, Shadow. Suddenly, sirens scream, lights flash, and chaos erupts. A gunshot, a lifeless companion, and a world of injustice collides. A gunshot, a lifeless companion, and a world of injustice collides. What the officers didn't know, they've targeted the wrong man. And now, one question lingers. Can ignorance survive when it meets true strength? Before we dive into this suspenseful story, drop a comment with your city so we can see how far it reaches. And if you enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe my channel. He was sitting in his backyard, the late afternoon sun warming his shoulders, his loyal dog by his side. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, just a man enjoying a quiet moment in his own home. But in the blink of an eye, sirens screamed, lights flashed, and everything he knew about safety shattered. Officers stormed the yard, tense and aggressive, their eyes fixed on him, unaware of who they were facing. The chaos erupted too fast for reason. His dog was gone, and a cold wave of injustice hit him like a storm. How could a simple walk, a quiet afternoon, turn into a nightmare? What happens when the world misjudges a man based on what they see, and not who he truly is? It was a quiet Saturday morning, and Jason Miller, 38, a retired Delta Force commander, was tending to his small suburban backyard. His loyal dog, Shadow, a sleek black Labrador, bounded around, chasing a frisbee with the same joy as a puppy. To the neighbors, Jason seemed like any other man, dedicated to fitness, devoted to his family, and the kind who'd always offer a helping hand. His days were predictable: morning runs, coffee on the porch, and afternoons spent in peaceful routines, far from the chaos of his past missions overseas. Yet beneath the calm exterior was a man who carried unimaginable discipline, precision, and resilience, forged from years of navigating life-and-death situations that most could only imagine. Today, however, none of that mattered to the world outside his gate. A world that is often judged by appearances, by skin color, and by assumptions. As he clipped the leash onto Shadow for their routine afternoon walk, a shadow of unease brushed his mind, not from any real danger, but from the invisible tension that had become a quiet undercurrent in neighborhoods like his. Something felt off, subtle, and unexplainable, as if the serenity he had fought so hard to build was about to collide with forces beyond his control. In mere minutes, the ordinary rhythm of his life would be shattered. The line between safety and threat, right and wrong, would blur in ways Jason had never faced. And in that collision, the consequences would be far more personal and far more painful than anyone could anticipate. Jason clipped Shadow's leash and stepped onto the quiet suburban street, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the sidewalks. At first, everything seemed normal. Neighbors waved from porches, kids played on the lawns, and the air was filled with the ordinary sounds of suburban life. But within moments, the calm was pierced by the low rumble of an approaching car. Jason didn't think much of it until the vehicle slowed, its engine humming ominously, and two uniformed officers stared directly at him. Their gaze wasn't casual. It was sharp, probing, as though Jason's presence alone had triggered suspicion. His heart tightened, but he tried to remain calm. Shadow tugged slightly on the leash, sensing Jason's tension. A quiet dread settled in his chest. The officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts, their posture rigid. The neighborhood that had always felt safe now seemed claustrophobic, heavy with silent judgment. Jason's mind raced, not with fear of physical threat from strangers, but with disbelief that his life, His identity and his years of service were invisible beneath the assumptions cast by skin and circumstance. "Sir, step over here," one officer commanded, his voice firm but clipped. Jason complied, moving slowly, eyes fixed on the ground, mind calculating every movement. Shadow barked once, alert and protective, as if sensing the brewing tension. He tried to explain that his dog was harmless, that they were just on a walk, that there was no reason for suspicion, but the officers ignored him. The escalating tension swallowed every word he thought to speak. The world seemed to contract. Around him, the street, the house, even Shadow's leash felt like it had tightened. Then came the moment that would define the rest of the afternoon. A misread gesture, a snap of Shadow's paw. Anything could have set off the chain reaction, and suddenly a gunshot rang out. Shadow yelped, collapsing to the ground. Time slowed. Jason's knees buckled, a cold fury and grief flooding him all at once. The officers hadn't expected a reaction. They hadn't known who Jason really was, the lethal skills, the years of command and control embedded in every fiber of his being. But now, staring down at his fallen companion, something inside him shifted. The street was still, heavy with shock. Neighbors peeked through blinds, whispers of fear and disbelief drifting in the air. Jason's chest heaved with rage, grief, and the knowledge that the world had once again misjudged him. But even as the officers reached for their radios, Jason knew that this was far from over. The injustice had ignited a fire, a storm that would no longer be contained. And the question loomed, could anyone survive the consequences of ignorance paired with prejudice? Jason's fists clenched as he knelt beside Shadow, the lifeless body of his loyal companion lying in the harsh light of the afternoon. Rage and grief collided, each heartbeat pounding like a drum in his chest. Years of discipline, life or death, training and countless missions had taught him precision, control, and patience. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, when human prejudice collided with the innocence of his loyal companion. He rose slowly, muscles coiled, eyes scanning the officers. Their weapons were out, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from underestimating who they faced. Jason's grief transformed into a forceful presence. Every breath he took carried the weight of injustice, the shock of what had just occurred, and the silent judgment of a life misread by strangers. The neighborhood watched in stunned silence, phones lifted to record, neighbors holding their breath, the tension thick enough to choke. Time seemed suspended. Jason's mind ran through calculations instinctively, not to harm, but to assert dominance over a moment spiraling out of control. He didn't speak, yet every movement, every stare communicated the consequences of ignorance, the price of prejudice, and the strength of a man underestimated. The officers shifted uneasily, their confidence faltering, but the damage was already done. Shadow's life had been taken, and with it, the illusion that appearances could define reality. And in that suspended instant, the neighborhood, the officers, and even Jason himself felt the gravity of a truth long ignored. Injustice, when left unchecked, leaves scars that cannot be unseen. As Jason stepped back, chest heaving, eyes burning, with resolve, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. The question lingered, heavy and unrelenting. How long would it take for the world to see the consequences of its own assumptions? Jason walked away from the shattered remnants of the afternoon. Shadow gone, the yard scarred with the evidence of injustice. His chest still burned with grief, Yet beneath the anger lay a steely resolve, one forged over years of impossible missions, where failure was never an option. He realized that no training could have prepared him for the pain of witnessing such needless cruelty, nor for the helplessness of knowing that appearances could dictate life and death in the blink of an eye. The neighborhood slowly resumed its quiet rhythm, but Jason's world had irrevocably changed. Every glance, every judgmental stare he had once ignored now carried weight. He thought about the countless others who had suffered far worse, whose voices had been silenced, whose lives had been misjudged before a single word or action could explain them. Shadow's death was personal, but it was also a mirror to a much larger truth. Racial prejudice, fueled by assumptions and fear, leaves invisible wounds that ripple far beyond one moment, one street, or one life. As he returned home that evening, Jason reflected on what it meant to exist in a world that often sees color before character. He understood that surviving such moments did not erase the pain. It transformed it into purpose. The injustice he faced was not an isolated incident. It was a thread in a vast tapestry of systemic inequities that too many endure silently. And while he could not bring Shadow back, he could ensure that the story of what had happened, the unfairness, the grief, and the courage to face it would be seen and remembered. This story is not just Jason's, it is the story of countless individuals whose lives are judged before they are known, whose safety is questioned because of skin, and whose humanity is often overlooked. It asks us all, how long will society allow assumptions and prejudice to dictate justice? How many more shadows must fall before the world finally sees the value of every life, the dignity of every person, and the courage it takes to rise above injustice? The lesson lingers, heavy and undeniable. Awareness is the first step, empathy the next, and action is what changes the course of history. Share this story, reflect on it, and ask yourself, what will you do the next time injustice crosses your path?